Well, I'm going to start off by talking about a process that I've sort of developed over the years in terms of problem solving or bringing about change or trying to get to consensus on issues that are important in the community. And really the way this process that I've kind of come up with, which I call the 5 Ps. And one of the things that I did is I literally sat down and picked three, four, five initiatives or projects that when I had been mayor of the city of Austin, I had pushed forward. A couple of them hadn't worked. A couple of them got derailed. And then others we had great success on. Sometimes we were surprised by how quickly it came together or consensus was built. And so I sat down and I tried to analyze what seemed to work and what didn't work. And I came up with the 5 Ps, and I'll talk about those in just a second. But since that time, I will tell you that I've really enjoyed the fact that I try to be religious about it. I try to follow this process on anything where I'm trying to solve a problem in the community, where I'm trying to bring people together, where I'm trying to initiate change, even on initiatives that we have for legislation now. When we're trying to think through that legislation, I try to put it in this framework, if you will, this analysis approach. And the 5 Ps, the first one is passion. And what I mean by that is what's motivating me? What's motivating the community? What's motivating the group that I'm involved with? If it's a not-for-profit, or if it's a governmental group, or if it's just an ad hoc grassroots group that has an initiative that they want to put forward. What is the passion that motivates them? What is the hope that is driving them? And as part of analyzing the passion, it's what I suggest is a SWOT analysis. You know, and too often, by the way, in people trying to bring about change, trying to do things, they focus on the old standard SWOT, you know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And they act like once they've done that, they've done everything they need to do. In my opinion, what you do is you analyze your motivations, you analyze your passion. Why are you interested to begin with? Why are you upset? Why are you pushing something? By doing a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths that you're hoping to utilize to bring about change? What are the strengths that you hope to be able to focus on so that you can bring the community together around this idea or this thought process? What are the weaknesses? What are the things that are creating problems, if you will? What are the opportunities out there? If it's something related to the environment, what are our opportunities if we're able to protect that aspect of the environment? What are the threats? What are the things that might bring that to an end, be a problem? Now, the reason that's the first thing to do is it seems to me that so often people don't take the time to analyze why they're doing what they're doing. What they do is they just jump to the plan, or they jump to the arguments in favor of some answer to the question. But I think you have to lay a foundation of what is the reason I'm motivated, and what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are causing me to want to be involved in the first place. That leads to the second P. And by the way, I'm a strong believer that one of the great failings in some of those initiatives that didn't work the way I wanted them to work, it was because I didn't take the time and I wasn't disciplined enough, or the people I was working with, we all together weren't disciplined enough to make sure we did it sequentially. So once we've identified our passions, once we've done the SWOT analysis, we know our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities and threats, then and only then do we say, okay, based upon that SWOT analysis, that passion, what are the possibilities? What are the second P is possibilities. What are the possibilities that will help us maximize the strengths, will help us minimize the weaknesses, that will help us seize the opportunities and avoid the threats. In other words, how do we build upon our passion? By recognizing all of the possibilities. Now, as a kid growing up, I heard it a million times. We've all heard it a million times. The phrase, anything's possible. Anything can happen. Well, that's true. Anything, I guess, is possible. And at this point, it is okay to list any possibility. In other words, at this point, what I call this the waving a magic wand point. If I could wave a magic wand, here's all of the things that I would do in order to bring about this community change or to bring about the community possibilities. Just name them all. I call it brainstorming without judgment. In other words, you can brainstorm any possibility, any idea, and it really doesn't have to be something that is practical. Let's explore it. Let's get it out on the table. And when I say without judgment, what I mean is nobody gets to judge it. There are no bad ideas at this point. So what you do is you start with your passion. You build upon that step by going to the second P, which is listing all the possibilities. But then that leads to the third P. And many times this is one of the more difficult ones because it does require some discipline. The third P is practicality. At this point, you've already listed all the possibilities. But now you get to the third P, which is, I got to be practical. I got to figure out, can I make any of those possibilities work? And by the way, remember, you've already focused on your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So you ought to be able to quickly identify those parts of the possibility list that might not work. But for example, this is where you'll ask the question, well, do we have the money to do it? Can we come up with the resources necessary to carry out one of those great possibilities? It may be a possibility that would solve everything. Literally, you would be waving a magic wand and you would find yourself able to fix something. But you have to get practical. It might be money. It might be legal problems. You might have an idea of how you could do something, but because of the way the laws are written, it's not practical. So that's where you have to get down to being really practical. But keep in mind, if this is working, you've identified your passions, you've now identified the possibilities, and you're building on it by eliminating or changing the possibilities to create potential practical results. Now I'm going to pause right here because too often what happens is on the practical part of it, people want to just jump to that point. They want to argue about, well, you can't, we start with an issue, we start with an idea, and the group jumps to, well, that's not practical. And they shout down ideas. My experience has been that things might be more practical than they first appear. But it requires you to build your way to it so that everybody is in the room and understanding the thought processes that got to it. And then you have better ideas. Or there may be a horribly impractical idea. But people are really pushing that forward. They've jumped too quickly to that step in the process, and so you haven't had the opportunity for the group dynamic to work its way through the discussion of all the different possibilities leading to the practical and the impractical. The point I'm trying to make is you need to always do this in a process. The other thing I'll say before I get into the last two P's is this is a good point. When you get to the practical, this is a good point. You've now been through passion and possibilities to maybe go back. Just take a moment to go back to those first two steps and make sure something new hadn't popped up in your thought process. As you've been going through this process, there may be things that you didn't think of when you were listing strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or you didn't think of as potential possibilities. Pause, take a minute, go back and look at those. So, passion, possibilities, and then practicality. And that leads to the fourth P, which is the plan. The plan about how you're going to bring about the practical parts. In a lot of community involvement activities, everybody always wants to know what the plan is. How are we going to do this? And again, Everybody wants to start there. They tend to want to jump to the plan. I'm a big believer that you can't put together a thorough plan or a thoughtful plan even if you haven't followed these step processes where you know what all the possibilities are or were, you know what's been decided to be practical and impractical, and only then can you put together the step-by-step plan. Now, I'll mention a couple things on plan because it depends on the initiative or the idea, of course, about what a plan is going to be, and you can't prejudge the plan. But almost every plan, in my view, ought to have a couple of things in it. One is it ought to have a time frame. It ought to have, as part of the planning process, when you're going to get certain things done in order to be able to move things forward. The other thing that I think it almost always has to have is it has to have some sort of dispute resolution. Because almost invariably, as you're moving your way through whatever plan you've made, you're going to find yourself in situations where people are going to say, that's not what we intended. That's not what we talked about. That's not what we were trying to do. That wasn't even one of the possibilities that was listed. So have in place some sort of dispute resolution process as part of the plan that will allow you to go back and reevaluate. And then the final P. I list it as the final P, but you'll see that it is really something you need to be thinking about all along. But the final P is people. People. And there's really two parts to that. Who's going to be involved? Who are you going to recruit? Who needs to be at the table when you're doing this and is going to help you carry this out? But the second is, who's going to be in charge? Often what occurs is great plans are put together and they end up being doorstops because nobody is really in charge. And so it can't be carried forward. So I think that you'll have to evaluate the people aspect of it. Who ought to be at the table, who ought to be involved, and who's going to help carry this out. And of course, that may be separated. There may be a lot of different people in charge of different aspects of it, but then it all has to come back together. And what I mean by you can see this is something you need to be thinking about throughout. Really, even when you're involved in the passion or listing possibilities or thinking about what's practical, and then putting a plan together, of course, you need to always be evaluating, do we have the right people at the table? Do we have the people that may have the expertise we need or have specific passions that ought to be at the table or different points of view so that you can help walk that through, have them help you walk through that process. So those are the 5 P's that I try to utilize for community change. As I indicated, it's something that I even do today. I have, in my first session of the legislature, I introduced legislation that dealt with land use planning. And we brought together a big group of people, a very diverse group from multi-counties, where we actually walked through that process. As I've looked at doing things in the area of transportation, typically, and it doesn't take a long time to do the 5 Ps if you do it in a certain way, but when we meet on those issues, I will always try to walk us through that process so that we make sure we hit all of the bases, and we always try to build one on the other as opposed to jumping forward. I hope that's going to be helpful to you.